So imagine trying to lock your front door just to keep out an intruder.
Right, just basic home security.
Yeah, exactly. But then you realize the intruder doesn't actually care about the door. I mean, they don't care about the locks, the walls, or even the foundation of your house.
They just bypass it completely.
Completely. Now, I want you to scale that up. Imagine you're trying to defend your entire home like a peaceful, glowing, primordial forest where every single tree, every breath of wind is part of this delicate, sacred balance.
And your enemy isn't bringing, siege engines or conventional weapons to your gates.
No, not at all. This enemy is this encroaching darkness that can literally phase right through solid matter. They bypass your defenses, they absorb your people, and if you try to strike back, your blades just pass through empty air.
It is, it's the ultimate nightmare scenario for any defensive tactician. It completely breaks the fundamental rules of physics.
In warfare in general, right? Oh, absolutely. You can't just build a thicker wall when the opposing force treats solid matter as a mere suggestion. It shatters the very illusion of safety.
And that impossible conflict is our mission for today's deep dive. We are venturing into the living planet of Yaenddarr, zooming in on this highly specific sacred sanctuary known as the Elysium Forest.
It's such a fascinating ecosystem.
It really is. And we're going to chronicle the desperate high-stakes struggle between the peaceful Florian defenders and this terrifying, anomalous dark energy known as the shados.
Yeah, we're looking at a profound thematic war here. I mean, this isn't just a border dispute over resources.
It's way bigger than that.
Exactly. This is what happens when a culture built entirely around pure primordial life and absolute harmony is forced into a corner by a force of, well, pure annihilation.
It's a clash of concepts.
Yeah, it's a biological and magical clash between the concept of creation and the concept of erasure. So, to truly grasp the sheer terror of what these shados bring to the table, we really have to start by understanding the absolute, pristine purity of what they're trying to destroy.
The stakes are incredibly high.
Right. The stakes go way beyond losing a few acres of woodland. We have to look at the origins of the Elysium Forest itself, because this ecosystem wasn't just the result of, millions of years of random evolutionary biology.
No, not at all.
It was born from something called the primordial seed.
Which is a fascinating concept in its own right.
Yeah.
The primordial seed was essentially this hyperdense repository of life potential.
Like a planetary starter kit?
Yeah, kind of. It was gifted to the planet by Celestria, the primordial eon of lunar energy. And what's critical to understand about Celestria's role in this universe is her defining essence.
Right, her emotional state.
Exactly. The very first emotion she experienced upon her own cosmic birth was unconditional motherly love.
I mean, that is just such a wild, beautiful starting point for planetary creation. We usually think of planets forming from, violent collisions of rock and gas.
This is chaotic physics, yeah.
But here, this overwhelming emotional state actually catalyzed a lunar wave of creative energy, and that energy birthed Yaenddarr.
And it didn't stop there.
No. When that primordial seed finally germinated, it didn't just grow a few saplings, it released what the text calls a verdant tide across the land.
It functioned like a shockwave of biological architecture. I mean, the forest that grew from it is deeply intrinsically luminous.
Oh, the glowing plants.
Right. We're talking about bioluminescent flora that turns the night into this mesmerizing, glowing spectacle. But it's not just pretty to look at. The celestial influence literally dictates the biology.
Meaning the trees actually grow in alignment with the stars.
Precisely. And the ecosystem acts as a living, evolving sanctuary of renewal. The forest isn't just a physical place you visit. It's an active participant in the preservation of life.
And the primary inhabitants of this sanctuary, the Florians, they reflect that biology perfectly.
They're so tied to it.
Yeah, they're humanoid, sure, but they are so deeply nature-bound that you almost can't separate where the Florian ends and the forest begins.
They don't just live in the woods.
No, their lives are entirely synchronized with its rhythms. They communicate with plants and animals through feeling and resonance, like this empathic frequency.
If you look at their village, Floravel, it highlights this symbiosis perfectly. I mean, they don't go out and chop down trees to build cabins.
That would defeat the whole purpose.
Right. Floravel is carved into the living wood of the forest itself. They gently guide the growth of the branches to form walkways that spiral like petals.
It sounds gorgeous.
It is. They literally harvest starlight into song. We see figures like Elder Umak, who acts as a spiritual guide deeply attuned to the root archives of the forest.
And younger Florians, too, like Alara, who serve as these silent, watchful guardians up in the canopy. But this brings up a massive vulnerability.
The lack of a military.
Exactly. They don't have a standing army. A society built entirely on empathic resonance and guided growth has absolutely no need for a military-industrial complex.
They have gardeners.
Right. They have storytellers and spiritual guides. But the problem is they are guarding what might be the most vital, reality-altering resource on the entire planet.
A substance called elixin.
Yeah, elixin.
Yeah.
And this is where the biology of Yaenddarr crosses over into straight-up metaphysics.
It really does. Elixin is this glowing, viscous liquid that originally spewed from the core of the planet. But unlike magma, it doesn't scald you.
It's warm.
Yeah, it's warm, it radiates in 5 constantly shifting colors, and its properties are entirely anomalous to our understanding of fluid dynamics.
Because when you touch it, it doesn't just feel wet.
No, it creates an active, resonant vibration. It literally sings to the biological systems it interacts with.
It sings to your veins. That phrasing alone is incredible. But the reason it is so fiercely protected is what that resonance actually does.
The memory aspect.
Yes. Elixin holds memory. It acts as the liquid lifeblood and the historical hard drive of the entire planet. And deep within the region of Seralis, in a place called the Rebirthing Pools of Lumarich, the merfolk use this elixir for something unbelievable.
They use it to perform soul restoration.
Which is just crazy. Let's really analyze the mechanics of that because it is staggering.
Okay, so when a living being dies on this planet, their spirit, their consciousness, naturally fragments and dims. It's entropy.
Right, they just kind of scatter.
Exactly. But the merfolk use these pools of elixir to reverse that entropy. And they don't do it through brute force. It isn't a mechanical resurrection where you shock a body back to life like a defibrillator.
No, they gather around the basin and they use vocal resonance.
They sing.
They sing. And they use specific emotionally charged memories to anchor the fragmented soul. They don't use a spell book. They use things like a name remembered by a tree or a laugh echoed in the whispering glade.
Or a pattern of breath once shared.
Yes. They are using the environmental memories stored in the elixir to physically weave a consciousness back into existence.
They shape this restoration through what are known as glyph tones. By vibrating the elixir at specific emotional frequencies, they allow the fragmented soul to stitch itself back together.
It's just so beautiful, but...
It raises a profound philosophical question, right?
Oh, massively.
Much like the ship of Theseus. If the merfolk use the elixir to stitch a soul back together, using a mosaic of memories left behind in the forest, is it the exact same person who died?
That is a terrifying and beautiful realization for anyone listening. Like, think about it. If you are rebuilt from the memory of your own laugh, are you or are you a clone made of memory?
The mechanics suggest they are restored, not rewound, so it's not a resetting of a clock.
Right, they've experienced the death.
Exactly. The individual who steps out of the rebirthing pool has been fundamentally altered by the experience of fragmentation and the intervention of the environment.
So they're whole again, but they are a new iteration of that wholeness.
Yeah. Elder Umok, the Florian spiritual guide, he frequently watches these rituals and weeps. And he isn't just weeping because a life is returned.
He's weeping at the sheer grace of the mechanism.
Right. The forest provides a literal cosmic mechanism for a second chance.
Okay, so if the Elysium Forest is this planetary immune system, this beautiful cosmic hard drive of memories, offering a second chance at life, it begs a massive question.
Where does the enemy come from?
Exactly. How does a threat like the shados even manage to exist on the same planet? If Yaenddarr was birthed from unconditional love, where does an encroaching darkness come from, and how does it breach the borders of this sanctuary?
That brings us to the terrifying duality of this world. Yaenddarr may have been born of creative, loving energy, but it is not a monolith. It contains the savage jungle.
Which is the polar opposite.
Yeah, this is a region of chaotic, wild wilderness. And embedded within this jungle are these localized anomalies known as dark energy patches. This is the birthplace of the shados.
And they aren't born from seeds or biological reproduction like the rest of the planet.
No, they spawn directly out of this corrupted energy.
And their behavior is pure nightmare fuel. I mean, they are driven by this insatiable hunger, preying on humans and animals alike, completely disrupting the delicate ecosystem.
They can shapeshift to hunt, too, turning into various creatures.
But the defining trait, the thing that makes them an existential threat to the Florians, is their relationship with physical matter. They absorb their prey entirely, and they phase right through objects.
Let's break down the physics of that phasing, because it
Uh,
highlights the thematic contrast perfectly.
right, the creation versus erasure thing.
Exactly. The Elysium Forest, the Elixir, the rebirthing pools, these are all systems entirely focused on the preservation of memory and the restoration of physical form. The shadows are the physical embodiment of entropy.
They just undo it all.
Their entire existence is predicated on erasing form.
Right, so they don't just eat you and leave bones behind. They absorb you. They leave zero trace.
When they absorb prey, they are literally erasing biological data from the ecosystem. And their ability to phase through physical boundaries makes a mockery of the concept of a safe haven.
It's terrifying.
It represents a fundamental breakdown of order. The Pauli exclusion principle, the idea that two solid objects cannot occupy the same space at the same time, it simply doesn't apply to them. They can move through a massive ancient tree as easily as you or I would walk through fog.
Think about what that does to the psychology of a peaceful society. I mean, if you're listening, have you ever felt totally safe locking your door at night, knowing those deadbolts are solid?
It's a comforting feeling.
Right. And the Florians lived in a village woven into ancient, massive trees with bark thicker than castle walls. That physical density had always been enough.
Until the shadows.
Yeah. Suddenly, in the dead of night, a shadowy entity can just step right through the trunk of a bioluminescent tree, stand over you, and erase you from existence while you sleep.
The psychological trauma of realizing that absolutely nowhere is safe would be paralyzing.
Paralyzing. But, I have to throw a wrench into the mechanics here.
Oh, go for it.
If a shadow can phase through solid objects at will, what is stopping gravity from just pulling them straight down through the dirt, through the crust, and into the core of the planet?
That's a great question.
There has to be a limit to this phasing, right? They must interact with some frequencies of reality, otherwise they couldn't even stand on the ground to hunt.
That is an incredibly astute observation,
Mhm.
and it points directly to their main vulnerability. They do not exist entirely outside of physics.
Okay, so how do they stay on the surface?
They manipulate their density selectively. They are dark energy, meaning they interact with gravity, but they can alter how they interact with electromagnetic forces, which is what makes solid matter feel solid.
I see.
The fact that they can navigate the surface of the planet proves they have a physical footprint, however slight. And that exact vulnerability is what gets exposed during a highly volatile catalyst event.
Right, the moment the encroaching darkness collides with an unprecedented source of light. This is such a cool part of the lore. This catalyst event centers on a figure named Lycaios.
The celestial sun.
Yes. We mentioned Celestia earlier, the eon of lunar energy. Lycaios is her son. And due to cosmic circumstances outside the scope of this particular sanctuary, he was knocked off course through the cosmos and crash-landed directly into Olivix Lake, right in the heart of the Elysium Forest.
He was seeking the Elixir waters to heal his shattered celestial body. But his arrival alone was an extreme anomaly for the ecosystem.
Just structurally, right.
Yeah, you have a being composed of pure stardust and celestial logic violently inserting himself into a world governed by primordial, earthy nature.
And he doesn't even get a moment of peace. Almost immediately upon dragging himself out of the lake, he's attacked.
But not by a shadow.
No, not initially. He's attacked by a savage dire cat from the jungle. Specifically, a predator named Scar, described in the texts as a blurring shadow of ancient Sylvatran fury.
The savage dire cats are apex predators, heavily influenced by the chaotic energy of the jungle. And Lycaios is injured, disoriented, and facing a massive biological threat.
But Lycaios acts on pure defensive instinct, and he actually defeats Scarsher, and he doesn't use a physical weapon.
No, he uses his celestial form.
Right. His body shimmers into an indigo celestial form, his skin veined with glowing lunar constellations, and he unleashes a radiant arc of pure celestial energy.
It is a massive, blinding release of cosmic power that neutralizes the predator.
Which solves his immediate biological problem, but creates a catastrophic magical one.
Huge problem. That surge of celestial stardust energy acted like a beacon. In a world where the shadows are highly attuned to energy signatures, releasing a blast of pure celestial light in the middle of a dark forest is deeply problematic.
It's less like lighting a bonfire in the woods and more like turning on a massive industrial electromagnet in a room full of iron filings.
That's a perfect analogy.
The shadows are composed of dark energy, and Lycaios just revealed himself as a localized point of intense opposing gravity. He didn't just illuminate the forest, he warped the local magical ecosystem and pulled the darkness right to his doorstep.
almost instantly.
Yeah, because the very next moment, a shadow scout emerges straight out of the forest canopy, dropping down to attack him.
We need to pay very close attention to how this specific Shadow Scout is detailed in the sources.
Because it's not just a blob.
Exactly. It isn't just a shapeless blob of shadow.
Yeah.
It is explicitly described as being hollow-eyed, glyph-etched, and already preparing to strike.
Glyph-etched. That is a massive red flag.
Oh, it changes our entire understanding of what the shadows are.
Yeah.
If you study the broader magical linguistics of this universe, glyphs are profoundly important.
Right, like the glyph tones the merfolk use.
Yes. In the lunar kingdom, glyphs are shaped by intention and emotion. A glyph is a language of memory, purpose, and deliberate design.
So, for a creature made of dark energy, a creature supposedly driven by mindless, insatiable hunger to have glyphs etched into its form, that implies a vocabulary.
Precisely. It implies intentional, dark design. It suggests that the dark energy of the savage jungle isn't just a naturally occurring hazard like a hurricane or a volcano.
Someone or something made it.
It has been structured, it has been corrupted by a malignant will. The glyphs indicate that the shadows are weaponized anti-magic. They are programmed.
And they are terrifyingly fast. When this scout drops from the canopy, Lycaeus is still physically staggering from the radiant arc he just used to kill the dire cat. He's entirely vulnerable.
Which is when Alara steps in.
Enter Alara, the young Florian who, as we established, has been silently watching from the branches. She sees this incredibly fast, glyph-etched shadow dropping toward the celestial stranger.
Now she doesn't draw a bow.
No, she doesn't throw a spear, because she knows it would just pass right through the shadow. Instead, she dashes in, grabs Lycaeus, and her palm begins to glow with a localized magic called Solar Twist Light.
This is an absolute masterclass in spatial manipulation.
Right. She uses the Solar Twist Light to cast what is called a fairy gate. She slices open reality itself like flower petals opening under starlight, and they instantly escape to the lunar shrine tree back in the safety of her village.
It's an incredible escape.
But I want to ask, how exactly does Solar Twist Light work against a phasing entity? If a shadow can walk through a tree, what does a glowing hand do to stop it?
It comes back to your earlier point about gravity and frequency. A physical shield is useless because it relies on molecular density, which the shadow can bypass. But light isn't just matter.
It's both a wave and a particle.
Exactly. When Alara uses Solar Twist Light, she is literally bending photons. She is creating a localized density of pure radiation that the dark energy cannot phase through. She isn't building a physical wall. She is weaving a cage of electromagnetic force.
So she is fighting energy with energy.
Exactly. She uses the light not as a blunt force weapon, but as a spatial manipulator. She alters reality faster than the shadow can adapt its phasing frequency. It is a breathtaking tactical maneuver, and it establishes the exact blueprint for how the Florians must survive going forward.
Because suddenly, this entire society of peaceful gardeners realizes that their thick tree bark is useless.
Their sanctuary is compromised.
Fully compromised. The only thing standing between them and total erasure is the manipulation of light.
This forces the Florians to fundamentally reinvent their relationship with the forest. A culture dedicated to nurturing plants, to guiding growth, and harvesting starlight for song, must now manipulate their sacred sanctuary for warfare.
It's a heartbreaking cultural pivot.
It really is. They have to turn to overarching countermeasures, collaborating heavily with their allies, the Fae. They abandon physical defenses and begin to rely entirely on light-based weapons and highly intricate magical trapping systems.
You're taking a planetary immune system and forcing it to become a militarized zone. But they do have natural allies in this ecosystem, assuming they work in harmony with them. For example, the Elysium dire cat. We just discussed Lycaeus fighting a savage dire cat from the jungle, but the Elysium subspecies is entirely different.
But the biological divergence between the two is a perfect microcosm of the planet's duality. The savage dire cat is a massive creature of fury, conquest, and chaotic growth.
Right, very aggressive.
But the Elysium dire cat, however, is smaller, far more slender, and its fur shimmers with the ambient colors of the bioluminescent forest.
And they can actually shrink in size for stealth, which is an incredible evolutionary adaptation for living in a dense, glowing canopy.
And crucially, they possess healing abilities intrinsically tied to the forest's energy. They act as natural guardians, maintaining the delicate balance of the ecosystem through symbiosis rather than parasitism.
So the Florians work with them.
The Florians coexist with them, relying on their protective instincts and sensory awareness. It highlights the sheer tragedy of what the shadows are forcing the Florians to do. The shadows represent a perversion of the natural order.
And Lycaios actually serves as a cultural bridge during this period. Recognizing the debt he owes Alara for saving his life, he goes out and learns from other factions within the forest to help the Florians adapt.
He studies with the allies.
Yeah, he studies the art of camouflage, trapping, and aggressive plant manipulation from allied wildlings and fairies, and he brings this tactical knowledge back to Florivel.
To bolster their defenses.
But practically speaking, how do you trap something that can just turn intangible? If you build a pitfall trap, the shadow floats out. If you use a vine snare, the shadow phases through the vine.
The logistics of trapping and energy being are incredibly complex. You have to trap the energy, not the physical form.
Right.
So the traps Lycaios and the Florians developed relied on the core principles of Alara's solar twist light. They couldn't use normal wood or rope. They had to carve intricate runes into the wood runes that project localized containment fields of light.
So if a shadow steps into the snare, the rune activates and creates a cage of photons that solidifies the darkness just long enough to repel it or destroy it.
Precisely. They weave solar twist light directly into the snares. They are forcing the shadow to interact with a frequency of light that interrupts its ability to phase.
That is brilliant for a skirmish. You catch a scout in the woods, the trap activates, the light repels it, you survive the night.
Yeah.
But tactically speaking, what happens when it isn't just a scout? What happens when the savage jungle decides to unleash a mass invasion? You can't trap a tidal wave.
No, you can't.
If hundreds of these entities flood into a village built on the ground, a few glowing tripwires and light arrows aren't going to prevent a massacre.
Tweaking their weapons and setting a few glowing snares was never going to be enough for long-term survival. To survive a mass incursion, they had to enact a complete, drastic societal shift.
They had to change how they lived.
They had to change the very architecture of their civilization. This is where we see the implementation of Lycaios' Month 5 blueprint of defense.
He didn't just teach them how to fight. He acted as the catalyst for an architectural revolution. The Florians looked at their vulnerable ground-level and subterranean dwellings, homes they had lived in for generations, and they abandoned them.
They elevated their entire society into the canopy of the ancient trees.
Think about what it means to completely abandon a core part of your cultural identity just to survive. The Florians are deeply connected to the root systems of the forest. The ground is sacred to them.
So leaving the soil.
To leave the soil and move hundreds of feet into the air is a traumatic severing of their traditional way of life.
But it was the only logical defense against an enemy that operates primarily near the corrupted dark energy of the ground.
Right. And building this new society wasn't just a matter of nailing some wooden platforms to a trunk. The construction of these canopy tree houses and defense towers involved weaving the structures directly into the living wood of the canopy.
They used enchanted materials.
Yes, they carved massive light bloom runes deeply into the bark of the host trees. Lycaios used his celestial intuition to help design structures that didn't just physically elevate the Florians, but magically shielded them.
It was the literal definition of architectural warfare. The Florians turned their homes into a Faraday cage made of light.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
The light bloom runes were specifically engineered to project a continuous ambient frequency that counteracted the phasing nature of the dark energy. By elevating their society, they put physical distance between themselves and the threat, and by infusing the wood with light bloom runes, they ensured that any shadow attempting to climb would be repelled by the very architecture of the city.
It's like moving from the ground floor to the penthouse during a catastrophic flood, but the floodwaters are made of sentient shadow monsters.
Exactly.
And they didn't have to wait very long to see if this massive society-altering effort would actually hold up. The lore details a horrific event that occurred shortly after this transition, known as the Feral Frenzy.
The Feral Frenzy served as the ultimate terrifying stress test for this new architectural defense. Now, this specific attack wasn't exclusively shadows.
Right. It was different.
It was a massive wave of Pharos, which are another type of feral threat. In this instance, they were resurrected and severely mutated by corrupted elixir flowing from the wildling field.
So you have the pure, memory-restoring lifeblood of the planet being corrupted into a mutagen that resurrects dead beasts into highly aggressive, hyper-violent monsters.
It's a horrible perversion.
And this wave of mutated Pharos floods directly into Florivel.
They swarmed the area with unprecedented aggression. They flooded into the abandoned ground-level village. And in the span of just 45 minutes, their newly mutated claws and jaws reduced the old Florian homes, the subterranean root archives, the beautiful spiraled walkways to absolute rubble.
The psychological toll of that moment must be unfathomable. Like, picture the Florians during this attack. They are safely hidden in their new canopy tree houses, high above the absolute carnage. The light bloom runes are holding. They are physically safe.
They have to watch.
Yeah, they are forced to look down and watch their ancestral homes. The places their families had lived for generations, the roots they had tended for centuries, be shredded into splinters by these resurrected beasts.
It's survivor's guilt mixed with cultural amnesia. They survived completely untouched, but they had to watch a massive piece of their history be violently annihilated.
She's gone in 45 minutes.
It forced a brutal acceptance that the world below was no longer a safe sanctuary. The text makes it clear that this event solidified their new reality. They realized that their decision to build the tree houses, to abandon the ground, was the only reason their species wasn't wiped out in less than an hour.
Adaptation was the only way they lived.
Exactly.
And while the feral frenzy involved mutated beasts, it proved the concept of the canopy defense. The elevation worked, the runes worked. They had successfully turned their village into a fortress of light suspended high above a sea of encroaching dark.
But even a fortress of light can be pushed to its structural and magical breaking point.
Right, it's not a permanent cure.
The canopy saved them from the first major wave, but the dark energy of the savage jungle is relentless. Which brings us to the absolute climax of this struggle.
Month 6, the finale. The continuous siege of the forest pushes the Florian defenses to the absolute brink.
The traps held, the light bloom runes glowed fiercely. The Florians fired volley after volley of light-based arrows into the darkness below.
But the feral and dark forces simply adapted.
They kept coming. The encroaching darkness started scaling the massive trees. The lore describes the newly evolved claws of the feral beasts, driven by the dark energy tearing into the bark of the canopy itself.
It is the terrifying realization that elevation is only a temporary fix if the enemy has infinite stamina.
Yes, the physical exhaustion of maintaining those light-based weapons and runes for months on end would be draining the Florians of their magical reserves.
You can't keep that up forever.
The darkness was literally creeping up the trunks, breaching the outer edges of the sanctuary canopy. The Florians had done everything right. They had adapted their entire culture, built the runes, fought with weaponized light, and it still wasn't going to be enough to hold back an infinite tide of entropy.
They were on the verge of being completely overrun.
Completely.
You can almost hear the shrieking of the beasts tearing through the branches, the sheer panic of a peaceful people realizing their ultimate fortress is failing. But then, right at the precipice of total erasure, a massive intervention occurs.
Streaks of brilliant violet and silver cut through the darkened sky above the canopy. The royal fairy guard of the celestial sovereign arrives.
It is the ultimate celestial cavalry, the arrival of an elite, cosmic military force. Their armor is described as glinting with heavily concentrated light bloom runes, and their weapons hummed with a radiant force that dwarfed anything the Florians had managed to produce.
And they didn't hold back.
No, they hit the canopy in a formation that cut through the encroaching darkness like living wind.
The sheer concentrated presence of that much celestial radiant power completely alters the battlefield dynamics. The encroaching threat, which had been relentlessly aggressive up until this exact second, suddenly falters.
The light was just too much.
The ambient light burns the dark energy. And then, for the first time in this entire conflict, the feral rage of the beasts and the insatiable hunger of the shadows turns into absolute primal fear.
The tide breaks.
They flee, scrambling back down the trunks and retreating deep into the darkness of the savage jungle.
The sensory shift in the forest in that moment must have been violently jarring. You go from the deafening, screeching horror of climbing beasts and impending death to the silent, awe-inspiring descent of the royal fairy guard bathed in violet and silver light.
The forest falls entirely quiet.
And then, just as quickly as they arrived, the guard vanishes. They don't stick around to establish a military base. They don't occupy the forest. They leave behind a swirling trail of pollen and residual celestial power.
Their role was exclusively to intervene, to tip the cosmic scales back into balance, and then depart.
It is a profoundly pivotal moment for Lycaios and the Florians.
What is critical to understand about this climax is that the Florians did not win this war through brute strength.
Because they couldn't.
Right. They fundamentally could not overpower the sheer volume of dark energy pouring out of the savage jungle. They won through sheer endurance. Their architectural warfare, their light-based traps, their willingness to sacrifice their ground homes, it allowed them to hold out just long enough for the celestial forces to take notice.
And the Florians recognize this as a victory worth celebrating. That evening, they hold the Night of Bloomfire, they drape the canopy bridges in beautifully woven lanterns, they drink nectar wine, and they dance beneath petal chimes.
They celebrate their survival.
They do! But I have to push back a little on the nature of this victory.
Go ahead.
Isn't it a deeply bittersweet ending? The Florians did literally everything right. They sacrificed their cultural identity, they moved into the trees, they invented new magic, they fought tirelessly for months. But at the end of the day, they still needed a massive celestial cavalry to swoop in and save them at the very last second.
You're calling it a deus ex machina.
Kind of, yeah. Doesn't that imply that the shadows are ultimately just fundamentally stronger than the Florians, that all their adaptation was essentially pointless if they just needed rescuing anyway?
That is a very common critique when looking at historical or lore-based interventions, but framing it as a simple contest of who has the bigger magical muscles misses the entire thematic point of the conflict.
Okay, how so?
The Florians' adaptation wasn't pointless. It was the prerequisite for their rescue.
I'm not sure I follow.
Think about the cosmic scale. The Fairy Guard didn't intervene on day one. Why? Because the shadows and the dark energy of the savage jungle are not just a local pest problem for the Florians. The arrival of the Royal Fairy Guard proves that this dark energy is a recognized cosmic enemy of the Celestial Sovereign.
This is a much bigger war.
This is a massive ongoing war between creation and entropy. The Florians didn't just survive, they proved they were a viable, resilient front line in that larger war.
Ah, I see. If the Florians hadn't adapted, if they had just stayed on the ground and waited for help, they would have been erased in the first week.
Exactly.
There would have been nothing left for the Fairy Guard to save.
The victory isn't about overpowering the shadows. It is about the resilience of light in the face of absolute erasure. For a peaceful agrarian society to completely rebuild their civilization in the canopy, to weaponize their sacred magic, and to endure against an apocalyptic threat that defies the laws of physics, that is a monumental triumph of collective will.
It's about not giving up.
The Fairy Guard's intervention is a validation of that endurance. The Chlorians proved they were worth saving by doing the impossible to save themselves first.
That drastically reframes the Night of Bloomfire. They aren't just celebrating the fact that they didn't die. They are celebrating the new identity they forged in the fires of that conflict. They managed to become a fortress of light without losing their fundamental connection to the living wood of the forest.
Precisely. The Elysium forest remains safe. The elixir continues to flow, and the soul-singing merfolk of Lumerich can continue their miraculous work.
The sanctuary of second chances endures.
It does. The shadows haven't been eradicated, but they are held at bay. They are lurking back in the savage jungle, repelled by a unified, highly adapted canopy of light, traps, and celestial vigilance.
It is an incredible, exhausting saga of adaptation and survival. But as we wrap up this deep dive into the Yaenddarr lore, there's one highly specific mechanical detail that keeps lingering in my mind. A final thought for you to mull over as we sign off.
Let's hear it.
We know that a shadow is born from pure, concentrated dark energy, and its entire biological and magical imperative is to absorb and erase data from the ecosystem. It is the physical embodiment of entropy.
Yes.
And we know that elixir is the pure liquid lifeblood of the planet, a substance so potent it can restore lost memories and weave fragmented souls back together.
The ultimate unstoppable force of erasure meeting the immovable object of biological restoration.
Exactly. So, hypothetically, what happens when those two absolutes collide? If a shadow, driven by its insatiable mindless hunger, were to breach the defenses of Seralis and phase directly into a rebirthing pool filled with pure, resonant elixir, what would actually happen?
Oh, wow.
Would the dark energy of the shadow be overwhelmed by the sheer density of life and purified into light? Or is entropy stronger? Would the very lifeblood of the planet be permanently poisoned and erased, breaking the cycle of rebirth forever?
That's a chilling thought.
It leaves you wondering, in a world composed of sentient ecosystems and cosmic magic, even the shadows might eventually get hungry for a soul.